ערב טוב לכולם. אני אמסור כמה הודעות בעברית עבור כולם ואחר כך אנחנו נעבור לאירוע. קודם כל פלאפונים בבקשה לסגור אותם, לא לצלצל. זה מדהים, כל התנועה הזאת, תנועה פבלובית. ודבר אחר, אפשר לצלם, לא להקליט. מי שרוצה בשביל הווב וכל הארקנום וכל השאר, לכתוב. יהיו פה הרבה שאלות. האירוע יתנהל באופן הזה. אני אערוך עם ברנדון רעיון שיהיה כ-45 דקות. לאחר מכן יהיה לכם פה הזדמנות לשאול את ברנדון בעצמכם את השאלות שאתם רוצים, ובלי ספוילרים. יש לנו מדיניות בלי ספוילרים, אז למי שרצה לשאול למה בעמוד האחרון בבעל השבוע זה קרה, לא. ספוילרים, בוא נגיד, אנחנו יודעים מה זה ספוילרים, אבל לא סוף, לא הפתעות וכל דבר אחר. So, without further ado, let's start. Warp IL 2019 with Brandon Sandrson. So, good evening, Mr. Sanderson. We've missed you.
I would think that you were tired of hearing from me by now.
Never. So, before we start, I would like to have Gilad come here and give you something that will be very, very helpful during this Q&A.
Okay.
Gilad, please.
Oh, I know what this is. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Let me, there we go.
You have your own.
Thank you. For those who don't know where this came from, it comes from Robert Jordan. He came up with it back in the 90s when fans would ask him questions about future books. He abbreviated Read and Find Out to just RAFO. And when I was given the Wheel of Time, Harriet, his wife, gave me the RAFO as kind of a, she actually gave me a thing printed with RAFO on it and said, I am handing you the RAFO. The RAFO is now entrusted into your hands. You own the RAFO. And so I had cards printed. I actually forgot to bring them, I'm sorry, that I give to people when they got RAFOs, but now we have a RAFO sign,
So, if you ask a question in its RAFO, you can photo Brandon with the RAFO, and it's your RAFO. So, let's start with something that might be familiar. The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades into myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave its birth comes again. In one age, called the third age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind, or more likely an air conditioner flow, rose in Tel Aviv. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor ending to the turning of the wheel of time, but it is a beginning. So, the first question. We know now that there is a Wheel of Time TV show.
Yes.
And my question is this. How involved are you in it?
So I have a fancy title called consulting producer, I think. The fancy title means they send me the scripts, I read them like I would workshop a book, and I send back feedback. So that's what I'm doing. So I've read some of the scripts for the show. I'll actually go to set next week. But I go to set not to make the show, I go as a visiting dignitary to get a tour and things like that. But Rafe, the showrunner, is really cool. He's been very good to work with. And I've enjoyed the scripts I've read so far, and I hope my feedback has helped them. So, yeah.
What do you think of the cast we saw in the meantime?
I liked it. So the cast, I felt like without the names of the characters they were playing attached, I could pick out every one of them. So I felt like that's some pretty good casting. We'll have to see how they act. Like, that's the real test, right? But it felt like, Perrin looked broody. Rand looked Rand-like. Matt looked mischievous. Yeah. Nynaeve looked like she could give her hair a good tug. So it was looking good.
Hope Tom Erling will have a mustache this time.
Yes. Hopefully Tom has his mustache. Yes.
Okay. So, in the introduction to The Gathering Storm, the first book that you wrote when you finished The Wheel of Time, you said that you read a scene by Robert Jordan and it amazed you. Now, is it the last chapter that you say it was wholly written, or do you mean any other thing, like the great big battle, what I call chapter 37?
Right, chapter 37 I wrote. Robert Jordan, before he passed away, I'll try not to give any spoilers here, because you made that nice announcement. He wrote the epilogue, except for one character, which I've talked about, but I don't want to say which one it is. But there's one character that I wrote all the epilogue for. He wrote big chunks of the prologue of all 3 books. It was one prologue I split among the 3. He wrote a lot of the stuff for Gathering Storm that involves Egwene. And there's one specific scene where Egwene gets a visitor who tells an unexpected lie. He wrote that scene, which made my jaw drop. But mostly I was talking about that scene and the stuff with the Tower of Genji, and then the epilogue.
Do you mean the dress question?
Yes, the dress question. Yep.
I think everybody.
Yeah. But that's a spoiler, so we won't say who it was. But yeah,
it is a dress. There are a lot of dresses in the Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
So, if you could change the ending of the book, in my opinion, it was quite ambiguous because there are neither beginning nor ends, but it was left open-ended, I think. Would you, if you could have the power to change it?
If I had the power to change anything about the books, I would just bring Robert Jordan back to have written them. So I wouldn't change the epilogue he wrote. I wouldn't, there were certain things in the notes he wrote that I felt we needed to change. They were almost exclusively things where he said, I'm thinking of doing this or something else. And for a few of those, something else made more sense once the story came together. But every word he actually wrote, I found a place to put in the book, and I changed as little as humanly possible, except in some of those places where, like some of the early notes had Rand using the Chodian call at the end, and that wasn't possible because then Jim destroyed one of them before he, in the books he was writing, and so there are things he changed as he moved along, and so there were alterations I had to make, but he didn't give me really an outline. He had some scenes finished and some Q&As with his assistants that I was given, and that I was able to preserve. So no, I wouldn't change the ending. The ending is ambiguous. Harriet says she doesn't know what it means either. That's Robert Jordan's wife. She said he was snickering while he wrote it, though. So a lot of things about the ending aren't ambiguous, but there is one aspect you're talking about. So. It's a really good ending if you haven't read The Wheel of Time. I think that the ending is a great ending. Yeah. But it does leave some things open. So,
have you ever been offered to write any spin-offs in Randland? Any you say, okay, now we want to see what happened to this character or what happened to this character, because there are, everybody goes his own way. So, have you ever considered doing it? Have you ever been approached about writing any of it?
So the publisher, Tom Doherty, wanted more to be done. And he came and he said, Harriet, we really would like to do more. Robert Jordan was going to do more. He had this spin-off about Matt he wanted to write. And so she came to me and said, she wasn't saying, let's do it. She said, what do you think? So she and I had dinner. And I made the argument that I had followed Robert Jordan for, most of my adult life. In fact, I'd been reading his books since I was 15, and I'd read the interviews. And he had said before he passed away, when fans asked, what would you do if you pass away? Will someone finish the books? And he said for years, no one will finish the books. I'm going to have the hard drives bulldozed. No one will finish them. And he only changed his mind on that at the very end, when he knew that the disease that was taking him was a rare blood disease, was probably going to kill him. And he finally said to Harry, he said, I do want you to find someone. I know how uncomfortable he was by this idea, and it wasn't that he didn't want the series to be finished. Why he always talked about that is he really didn't want the Wheel of Time to keep going. The Wheel of Time continues turning, but he didn't like the idea of it. He had worked on Conan himself, a series that had gone through many, many different authors, and said, I just don't feel that's right for Wheel of Time. And so I said to Harriet, I don't think it's right. I don't think Jim would like it. And she said, that's what I thought too. That's my feeling, but I felt like we both I wanted to see where you were, and we both need to present a unified front to the publisher, because the publisher's job is to provide as many books as possible. That's what a publisher does. And so it's not my call. Let's make it very clear. I don't get to decide this. If Harriet changes her mind and decides she wants books written, more Wheel of Time books, then that is totally her choice. I told her I would not do any more, even if I were asked. Just out of respect for Robert Jordan, I don't think that I would feel comfortable doing that.
Do you think it is possible now that the Warrior of Thai is released? I think this week was released.
Yeah, the Warriors. Yeah, so that was his first written fantasy novel, though not published. I think it is possible. Like if those people really want them, Harriet really loves listening to the fans, and it's possible that if people really want it to happen, that she will be swayed. And so it's possible the fans, if you want it to happen, I don't think it would be. A terrible thing if it did, but I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it. So I feel like this is a good metaphor for this crowd. I feel like I was handed the One Ring, right? Like I was Sam, right? I got to carry the One Ring for a little while because Frodo couldn't carry it anymore, but I had to give the One Ring back. It wasn't my total burden. It was mine for a brief time when Frodo wasn't there, but it's Frodo's, it's not mine. And I handed the One Ring back, and if I were to take it back now and keep going, I don't know that I would ever be able to stop. You know how Gandalf is like, don't give me that? That's how I am with this.
You're afraid you'll become Gollum.
Yeah. And so maybe someone else out there can do it. Maybe it's appropriate for someone else to do it, but I do not think Robert Jordan wants me to write any more Wheel of Time books, and so I will not do it.
Okay, great. Thanks. So a question that, I don't know, people probably ask you a lot if we talked about you finishing the Wheel of Time. A lot of authors nowadays seem to take their time, their leisurely pace while writing. I will name just a few.
Let's not name any names.
Like any names. One with this one and one with this one. Will not name any names. You name a name. Have you ever been approached to do the thing because you've done such a marvelous job?
Vampire, get no. No, I have not. Yeah, let's just say, no, I have not been approached of any of the names you're talking about. I don't think either of them want anyone to, and I think that we should pray for their health. So
every day,
and keep them and hope that they are able to finish the series that they want to finish and the way they want to finish them. I would. Let's get around. People ask me a lot, would you finish Song of Ice and Fire if you were asked? I would say no to a Song of Ice and Fire. The reason for this is that I think I love what George does. I think he's a brilliant writer, but Song of Ice and Fire was too dark for me. Specifically the Daenerys scenes in the first book. The sexual violence against a teenage girl was beyond my threshold of what I was comfortable reading. And so I read the first book, said that's brilliant. I'm not reading anymore. I've read a lot of George's other work, and I think he is brilliant. So don't go around saying Brandon hates George Martin. In fact, because his characters are so compelling, I followed religiously the entire Song of Ice and Fire story on every spoiler forum when the new books came out. But I didn't feel, it was not, it was both kind of a mental and a spiritual thing that I didn't feel like reading more of that. I would be a bad match for it, for multiple reasons, right? I joke that if I were given Song of Ice and Fire, everyone would stop swearing and they would get married. That wouldn't actually happen. If I said yes to doing it, it would be on me to make sure it followed the themes and the content that is appropriate to that book series, right? If I said yes to Song of Ice and Fire, people would keep swearing, and they wouldn't get married, and I would do my best to make it feel like it belongs, because that would be my duty as the author. But that's why I would say no, right? Because you don't want me doing that, because it would be counter to what I want to put into a story and the way I want to write it. There are other books that, if in the right situation, I would say yes to. I'm not going to say what they are or things like that, but there are authors I think my style matches, that if I were needed, like a Wheel of Time thing happened, absolutely needed, I would step in. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't want it to happen. I don't want to ever have to do this again. I didn't want to have to do it for Wheel of Time. When I was offered Wheel of Time, I almost turned it down because I did not want to have to do it, right? I've been following these books for, at that point, what was that, 17 years of reading the Wheel of Time, and I wanted Robert Jordan to write the ending. And I didn't want to be the person who ruined the Wheel of Time. And so when Harriet asked me, I didn't know her, by the way, for those who don't know. I just got a phone call. She had read Mistborn. She really liked it. She thought I was a good match. She knew I'd said good things about Robert Jordan. She didn't see all the complaints I'd made, fortunately, because the only people who complain more than people who hate the Wheel of Time about the Wheel of Time are the people who love the Wheel of Time. When I found out book 6 was not the end, you find me on forums being like, what? But I sincerely love the series, and I didn't want to be the one who messed it up. I actually thought about it that the day that I said to Harriet, I just have to think about it. I do. And I wrote her an email, and the email said, first it said, "Dear Harriet, I promise I'm not an idiot." This is because I could barely talk in talking to Harriet. Harriet, you guys probably don't know Harriet, but Harriet is known as one of the great editors in the field. It's like Harriet calling you is a little like George Lucas calling you or something like that. Like she edited Ender's Game, right? She edited Fred Saberhagen. She edited like these masterpieces of the genre. She discovered Robert Jordan. She was his editor before she married him. Like, you know, getting a call from Harriet is not something that happens every day. And so I said, "Dear Harriet, I promise I'm an idiot. I really thought about it. I'm going to say yes if you still want me, because I feel that if I turned it down and it went to someone who didn't love the series as much as I did, then it would be my fault if it got messed up that way too. So at least this way, if I mess it up with good intentions. But I don't want to have to ever do that again. It was something that I sincerely felt like, you know, no one wants to carry the One Ring, or if they do, don't give it to them, right? It's not something I wanted to have to do. But it was something I took very seriously once I said yes. And so, yeah.
Thank you. I think to other people's defense, if you were writing a Game of Thrones or a Song of Ice and Fire, at least we'll have Hoyt in there. So our loss. So how does your publisher react when you tell them you're going to write a superhero novel or My First Dragon in Space?
Yeah.
How to Train a Dragon in Space instead of the new Stormlight?
They're used to it by now. They just have to deal with me. A little while ago, we moved away from a traditional publisher-author relationship in the U.S. I am basically a small press that co-publishes the books with Tor. They get a book. They get to then publish it only after I tell them what they're getting. And they just know they have to deal with it. They know my process, right? If you haven't heard my process, well, I've talked about it here. The way I stay productive, the way I am a little faster than some of my contemporaries, is that I am always letting myself do a new project after I finish another one, and so I don't ever suffer from burnout. If I had to write Stormlight 5 right after Stormlight 4, I would burn out. But since I get to finish Stormlight 4 and write Skyward 3 and Wax and Wane, and then come back to Stormlight, I get to do lots of different things, and that's vital to my mental health and my writing health. And Tor knows that. They're just really glad because you know, there are 5 big publishers in the U.S., right? And 4 of them have lead fantasy writers. The 5th one doesn't yet. The lead fantasy writers are me, George Martin, Neil Gaiman, and Pat Rothfuss. Guess who has a book every year? And guess who doesn't, right? Now, that is not me throwing shade at the others, by the way. Right? Like, Neil doesn't put out a book every year because he's off doing things like making his television shows and stuff, right? I'm watching, by the way,
we'll
Good
get
Omens
to that later.
right now, which is really great. You know, George kind of deserves a rest. He's in his 70s, you know? He toiled forever on this. And, you know, authors have different mental health. They have different processes. These people aren't not putting out books. They aren't avoiding it because they hate you. They want to write a great book and release a great book. And, you know, their personal psychology, their writing ability, the way they approach writing. I often say that I'm really lucky and that I was terrible at this when I started. Because I was so bad at this, I wrote 13 books before I published one. I've talked about that a lot. I got very used to finish a project under, you know, my own imposed deadline while working a full-time job, while going to school. And that was just the mentality I used to write all those books. And that just transferred really well to being professional. Because I hit the ground running. You know, my second book was secretly my 14th book, and I know my process really well. And because I was so terrible and it took me so long to get good at it, I built really good habits. I blame my mom a little bit for this, as I talked about the other day. But at the end of the day, you can't rush a person's creative process. So Tor just knows how lucky they are. It's not that, you know, that there's anything wrong with the other guys. I just happen to be able to have a psychology that writes more quickly than them. And Tor got me instead of the others, and they are really happy, right? Like, I can get away with a lot at Tor because when Jim passed away, they were panicking because the way that publishing works, it's the way that entertainment works. I don't know if you guys know about this, but all of entertainment survives on the hits, right? The ones that sell really well and pay for everything else. And Wheel of Time at the publisher was selling, you know, a new Wheel of Time book coming out in English sold like 1 million copies a year.
By hardcover, 500,000 each book.
What's that?
Each book by hardcover, 500,000.
Yeah, 500,000 hardcover, and then audiobooks and ebooks, right? So you're looking at about 1 million copies for its hardcover to paperback initial release. So about 500,000 hardcover since initial release. The number 2 was selling like 70,000, right? The number 2 author.
Terry Goodkind.
Good kind. And so if you look at the jump between 500,000, maybe up to 1 million, but 500,000 low mark down to 70, you realize how much a publisher depends on the big hits. And then Robert Jordan passed away. And then suddenly it's like, what are we going to do? And there was a lot of panicking, and there was a lot of assumptions that things were going to go very, very poorly for Tor. And then the Wheel of Time fans were very good to me. They embraced the fact that I was going to finish the series. I got the nicest death threats, by the way. We're in your corner, we love you, you're great. If you screw this up, we'll kill you and dance on your grave. Thumbs up. But they did. They rallied around me. They were willing to give me a shot. And the 3 I released continued the trend of each Wheel of Time books outselling the previous ones. And it was just the same steady slope. And so there was like a collective sigh of relief from the entire publisher that the books didn't stop selling. And fortunately for them, Oathbringer then continued that trend, right? By the time Oathbringer came out, Oathbringer sold what a Wheel of Time book did. And so the publisher is just like, they're just really grateful that something else took off. And this is not because of Brandon being awesome. Let's be clear about that. There are as good or better writers than me that don't sell as many copies because entertainment is kind of this fickle business. And I can't promise that great writing will actually sell. Nobody knows. But I am lucky that what I love to write connects well with the audience and that I'm pretty good at it and that they embraced me. So Tor ended up kind of at a happy accident getting another author that can continue their fantasy line. And so, yeah, so I have a good relationship with the publisher. They very much like. So when I say I've written a YA book that Random House is publishing, they'll be like, okay, we just don't want to make you mad, so go do your thing. When's our next Stormlight book, please?
Well, great. So what was the moment that you finally understood that you are an international success?
Oh, yeah. The first moment that happened was actually before the Wheel of Time, things were really starting to take off. It was Hero of Ages is where it started to really just hit. And I can still remember when so my agent, one of their jobs is to go around the world and sell all my books and in all the different languages, right? And they're very, very good at this. Most of the languages you sell the books in, the population of fantasy readers is such that, they aren't big checks. We don't do it for the big checks for a lot of these countries, right? It's just more about how science fiction fantasy fandom is a big community, and we like having the books. And a lot of the smaller countries, the agent doesn't really earn their money back, but it's still cool to do, so we do it. And so I'm used to getting these checks for $50, right? Or things like this, where it's like, your royalties from this country, here's your Bulgarian rights, it's $50. And you're like, yes, and I opened a check from Taiwan, and I was expecting $50. And it was 50 grand, right? And so I called the agent, I'm like, hey, you moved the decimal. I legitimately just thought it was a bank error. I'm like, this is, when you're expecting 50 and it's 50 grand, right? That's, and your agent said, guess what? Turns out Mistborn is a massive bestseller in Taiwan.
So you're almost big in Japan.
Almost big in Japan. Most fantasy authors aren't big in Japan, by the way. Japan's one places that's very hard to sell fantasy. And this is, the local writing traditions are so strong that they have their own, the anime and manga and light novels and lit RPG and stuff. That traditional Western fantasy just doesn't do very well in Japan, which is totally fine, right? They have lots of cool stuff. I read their stuff. Yeah, when I got that, and then the other countries started coming in, and instead of being $50, they'd be $5 grand or things like this, and you're like, oh, something is happening. And my agent's like, yeah, something's happening. And that's when we first got the inkling.
So I also read that you went to visit the United Arab Emirates, and you wrote The Alloy of Law while you were on the plane.
The Alloy of Law, I wrote on it. I didn't write the whole book.
No, so my question is, what did you wrote on the way here?
I wrote Stormlight 4 on the way here.
Yeah!
Let's see if I can give you a non-spoiler version of the scene so you can know when you get there. In the scene, the person who's a bondsmith, those who've read it, is being flown about by windrunners who are not the windrunner who is the main character. So when you get to a scene that this character is being flown about by windrunners and moving to a different part of the world, you will know that scene was written on the flight here.
This is also a question you've probably been asked a lot. After you finished writing a book, it's published, it's gone away, and suddenly you have an epiphany, say, oh, I could have wrote it better. Do you have this kind of instances?
Oh yeah, all the time, all the time.
Please elaborate.
It's usually right. It's usually right, but it's also usually right to just accept that a book is like a snapshot of your writing ability.
Pun intended.
At the time, yeah. Pun not intended, but I'll take it. A book is a snapshot of an author's writing ability at a specific time in their life. And we have to kind of accept that because it's often attributed to Da Vinci. It's probably wasn't said by him, but there's a great quote that says, art is never finished, it's only abandoned. And you do have to do that, right? You do have to move on to the next thing, and there are always things that I wish I could change. Like the ending of Final Empire. I've talked about this one a lot. The first Mistborn book feels a little too Deus Ex Machina to me. Why is this? It's because my editor came back to me and said, hey, the first book's ending lacks a little bit of punch. Could you punch it up? And I said, oh yeah, I can move some stuff I was going to do in the second book to the first book, but I didn't have the foreshadowing for that to work as well as I wanted it to. And after the fact, after the book came out, I'm like, I should have moved this foreshadowing, I should have moved this foreshadowing, and things like that. Like, you're going to find that all the time. I experimented with reverting a change. I made a change to the end of Words of Radiance, to the book right before I sent it, and then I decided I liked the other version better, so I reverted it for the paperback, and it just led to too much confusion, right? Fans don't know which version is real, even though the end result is the same. Little details shifted, and some things in there, and so it's just too confusing to change things on fans. So when we do the 10th anniversary editions, we try to update some of the language, like, you know, make the prose a little bit better and update continuity, but we try not to change anything substantive.
So we'll have a Mistborn 10th anniversary?
It's already happened. Mistborn 10th anniversary is out in the UK and the US, so I don't know if the publisher here will decide to do that, but we're releasing the Warbreaker 10th anniversary this year. So yeah.
Okay, so let's say we are 20 years in the future. You finished the Cosmere books. What do you think you'll write next? I don't think you'll ever stop writing. So.
No, I won't. Let's get me there first. Because for me to finish the Cosmere, I need Warbreaker 2, I need to do Elantris 2 and 3, I need to do the Threnody novel, I have 2 other standalones that aren't on planets you know yet. I need to finish 6 more Stormlight books. I need to finish the last Wax and Wayne book and 2 more Eras of Mistborn, and I need to do the prequel Hoid story. So, yeah.
The Dragonsteel books.
Dragonsteel books. And so, I mean, the Cosmere, I don't know the count on that, but the Cosmere right now is what? 6, 7, 8, 9. It's like 15 books, right, so far. And I have like more than that left to write, and it's been 15 years. So we're averaging 1 book a year, so 20 years, hopefully I'll be approaching, but let's get me there first.
Okay. So if you will say you are the MCU, will compare you. We are at I think the Winter Soldier period.
Maybe, yeah. So the comparison to the MCU doesn't quite work. It does work. It is the closest thing. The thing that I warn people is that the convergence of the Cosmere books is more about the clash of the different cultures of the Cosmere worlds, and it's less about uniting a group of heroes against, right? Like the MCU works because your title character, your title character, your title character, and your title character are going to team up, which is really cool. For the Cosmere, don't imagine that that's where I'm going, though some of those characters will show up. The idea is that I'm building Star Wars 1 planet at a time, or Star Trek, and I'm then going to deal with the intergalactic politics of it all. And it's the clash of all these different societies and their different magics and the way of seeing the world is what I'm pushing toward, rather than a big team-up event.
Yeah, but I think everybody would like to know, what is the Infinity War of the Cosmere?
The Infinity War of Cosmere is, the equivalent would be the last Mistborn trilogy. Yeah. Yeah. Someday. Yeah. Someday.
Is there a certain book that you've read and you said, my God, I wanted to write this book?
So I usually answer Jurassic Park to this one. I really love how Jurassic Park came together and how its use of science and things work kind of as a quote-unquote magic system. That's one of my favorites that I kind of wish I had come up with that. Otherwise, the thing that I envy most usually aren't other books, though I love other books. Most of the time, the books I love are so distinctively of that author that I don't wish I'd written it, because then it would have to change, right? Like, it wouldn't be mine. Like, I love Name of the Wind and The 100,000 Kingdoms because those are distinct products of those authors' visions for what fantasy should be. And I can't write their vision, right? The one thing I do envy a little bit is, and I answered this in the Q&A last night, I really envy sometimes the way that video game writers can tell stories. The one I often mention is Undertale, right? Yeah, a few people are Undertale fans. If you haven't played Undertale, it's great. And it's able to do narrative.
Great graphics, by the way.
Yeah. It's able to do narrative in a way that my form can't do, right? Which is really cool. And I play a game like Undertale, I'm like, wow, you tell stories. I play Dark Souls. I love those games. And the way they can do story is not the way I do story, right? Their way they approach lore and story is so cool and so different from my form that I kind of envy their ability to tell stories in different ways.
This is a great follow-up question because I didn't expect it, but would you consider doing a video game? I know you've written for Infinity Blade.
I did write. So I
but have you been approached to write a video game?
I have been approached to write multiple video games. So first I tried to get a Mistborn game made, and that didn't work for various reasons I won't go into now. But we tried very hard. I every year have multiple people come to me and ask me to write video games for them, and a large number of these are Chinese companies who are making very games with sketchy monetization that I think just want my name attached. And I've said no to all of those. I've also had legitimate game makers. And it's not that, you know, I've had legitimate game makers come and ask me. And some of those deals have not panned out. And in other cases, there are things that I've done with them that might eventually come out and things like that. So this is something that I'm interested in doing. And something that I've been playing video games since I talked my parents into an Atari 2600, right? And so yeah. It is something you'll see me doing, but you probably won't see me being able to write a video game in the same way that a true video game maker can, because they have a different skill set. Like if I'm going to write for a video game, I'm going to world build for them, and I might be writing monologues for characters, but I'm not going to do something like Dark Souls where I write every item description, because I just don't have the time for that, right? And it's not my skill set. And so it has to be a video game that can use my skill set. Even though I envy how other video game writers do their things, me trying to write screenplays, for instance. People ask, are you going to write the screenplays for your movies if they ever get made? And the answer is probably not. Like, I want to be in the room with the writers, and I want to talk to them. But me trying to write screenplays is a little bit like Michael Jordan trying to play baseball, right? And Michael Jordan, if you get, this is American sports metaphor, I know, but Michael Jordan was an okay baseball player. But if you didn't know that, he was actually pretty decent. He was almost professional caliber. But that almost is a big miss in when you're working at the top tier. And what I do, I'm working at the top tier, right? Usually in the States, I don't know how this translates overseas, but I'm in if you go to Amazon, you can list by the authors, by just which authors, and I'm usually in the top 50, often in the top 20, which means that, you know, there's 19 other authors in the entire country that are selling more books, which is just weird, right? And I'm not going to work on that level writing screenplays. I would rather get someone who's in the top 20 of screenplay writing to write the screenplay so we get a really good screenplay than feel like I have to do it because I just haven't practiced that skill as much.
You once wrote about the Witcher game, the CD Projekt Red. Yeah. You said, I would be willing to give my franchise for free if you do the game. Is it still possible?
Oh, absolutely. So the reason I said I do that, for those who don't know, CD Projekt Red is one of the, you can clap for them, they're great.
They deserve it.
So I have never played another video game that was based on a book that was actually good as a game. Now, the Discworld game was funny, and and so was the Hitchhiker's game. The Hitchhiker's game was actually good, but it's a different sort of thing, right? But I've played a lot of games where the writing was good, because of the author's involvement, but the game wasn't good. And I played, but they made a game that feels like it, you know, I haven't read a lot of Sapkowski, sorry, but it feels like it's very true to a fantasy world, but the games are just fantastic, right? And so, since there's really only one company in the whole world doing that, they are the top 1, right? And I'm top 20. I could only be improved, you know, by them, and so I wouldn't give it to just anyone, right, for free, but somebody that's that top tier, the chance to just get a good game would be well worth that. I just posted that randomly on a Reddit thread. Don't read too much into it.
If anyone here has any connection to CD Projekt Red, please give them the message.
No, do not do that. I didn't want to put them on the spot, right? That wasn't my goal, because that puts them on the spot a little bit, which was, I didn't want to be like sauntering out and calling them out. I just wanted to indicate that, you know, it's really rare to get a good video game adaptation of a book, and you know, it just doesn't happen very often. So I would jump at the chance. So.
Okay, now we'll move to questions that were accepted in our website.
Oh, cool.
In Opsa. Yeah. So these are people, fans' questions before the fans themselves. So I will say the name of the person. If you are here, you can clap, you can clap. So the first one is Urigat. Are you here, Uri? Oh, nice. So his question is, how do you handle negative comments before the book comes out and afterward, the reviews? Yeah. Have you ever even had bad reviews?
Oh, yeah. Hamlet has bad reviews. Even worse, Terry Pratchett has bad reviews. Yeah, I know.
Inconceivable.
I mean, you can smack down Shakespeare, but my man Terry. Yeah, right? So yeah, absolutely. There's a video on the internet that tried to find the best reviewed book in the history of all time, and they landed on Words of Radiance.
Yes, it was.
So I'm not sure about their methodology, but I'll take it. But yeah, I get bad reviews. Everybody gets bad reviews. So I'm glad you split this into 2 parts, because these are 2 very distinct parts. A bad review before the book comes out is something you can do to fix the book. There's still time, right? This is why I solicit a lot of beta reader reads. Now, one thing you have to know, if you're an author in this audience, great art is always going to appeal to some people and not to others, okay? You can make the best fish dinner, like you can cook salmon the best way and make, you know, the 1% of the 1% best salmon meal in the world, and I won't like it because I don't like fish, right? Okay, you don't have to clap for not liking fish.
Yeah, this is special clap.
I should like fish because it's good for me, right? But you can make the best. You can make the best in the world.
Don't eat tuna sandwiches. People here will understand. It's okay. Don't eat the tuna sandwiches.
You can make a mediocre ochre mac and cheese, and I will love it, right? I'll like a great one better. But art, we treat writing a little bit too much like it's this magical thing that if you can find the right piece of art, it'll appeal. Writing, it should appeal to everyone. That shouldn't be the case, right? Human beings are also different. That you shouldn't feel bad disliking a piece of art that other people like. You also shouldn't get mad if people dislike a piece of art that you like, because that's in the nature of art. And so you gotta, as a writer, understand staying true to your vision and doing things consciously, even though some audience may not, a good example of this is Way of Kings, right? You probably shouldn't start your book with 3 prologues, right? Right? Yeah, actually, it's 4, isn't it?
I think it's 2.
It's 3.
Really?
Because the Sen chapter I call chapter 1 is actually a prologue, right? I feel guilty calling it prologue number 3. But the first chapter is also what we would call a prologue, right? It's happening at space and time before the main narrative from the viewpoint of a different character who's not a main character. So there's 3 prologues to Way of Kings. Bad idea. But the piece of art I wanted to do, that was integral to the piece of art. Casting that out, even though it might make the book more accessible in the long range, would make it not the piece of art I wanted to make. And so that identifying those things that are integral or integral, I'm not sure which one it is, which are very, very vital to the story you're telling, but might be something that some people just don't like, it's just fine. Identifying the things that you are accidentally doing that are going to annoy readers that you don't want to do, that are making them give the reaction you don't want to get to the story, those are completely different things, right? And before your book comes out, identifying as many of those as you can and fixing them is one of your jobs. And some people, beta readers are really handy. For other people, you know, it's you and your editor finding those things. For me, it is the beta readers. But I want to find as many unintentional things I'm doing that are limiting the story's impact and audience as possible and fix them. After the book comes out, it's still useful to know these things, but reading bad reviews is terrible and heart-wrenching. So I recommend after a book comes out, having that filter through someone, a spouse, an assistant. Like I tell my assistant, watch for themes that people are mentioning that you think are legit weaknesses in my writing that are coming out in the bad reviews, so that we can work on that if it's a systemic problem that I'm having. I need to know that. I need to know if, you know, if my female characters are consistently bad. I want to know, right? If people don't like Shalon's humor because Shalon's humor is very intentionally a type of humor I like and not a lot of people do, that's okay. They can give a bad review. I'm not changing anything because that's what I did on purpose, right? And for all the people who don't like that, you can go read Wayne, who has a different type of humor. But you know, there's a distinction there. Does that make sense? And having people who can filter that out for you and watch for things that are being consistently said can be really handy. Dee Dee's like, Brandon, you haven't even got to audience questions yet. Why are you answering these all at like taking a half hour? I'm an epic fantasy writer, right?
Okay, so let's try to make it quick.
Okay, let's do some rapid fire questions.
Rapid fire questions.
I'll do these ones each short.
Okay, what is the first thing you do when you finish a book?
I go tell my wife, and she says yay for me. That's her job. Yay, Brandon, good job.
What is your favorite scene in your books?
I don't pick favorite scenes, characters, or books because they're all my children, and I do them all for specific and different reasons. Yeah.
Are you going to put a gay character in your book as a major character?
Yes, someday I will. I'm easing my way into it because my specific culture and biases, I think, would lead me to do it poorly until I've kind of eased my way in. There will be main characters who are LGBTQ in the future. I'm getting there. Be patient with me.
If you needed to pick a band to write your soundtrack, which band would it be?
Band to write my soundtrack? Probably Two Steps from Hell. Yeah.
If you were in the Reckoner's books, what kind of superpowers would you have, and what would be your weakness?
I am canonized in the Reckoner's books, in the Reckoner's board game, as Quicksand. My weakness is early mornings. Get me up too early and my powers go away.
If you could pick any author from history, and you could meet with him and ask him a question, who would it be, and what would be the question?
I'm going to guess God doesn't count.
Moses.
Moses, I could go with Moses. Would it be Moses? Would it be Abraham? It's going to be one of the Bible writers, right? It might just be Isaiah, or one of the ones, like, it would probably be Daniel, and I'd be like, let's go over that dream, right? Let's go over that dream, and you can tell me exactly what it actually means. You can trust me, I won't tell anyone.
So, try to read it in Hebrew, you can't.
Secondary question answer to that is Robert Jordan and how did I do?
So, my question is, how did you think you did it? How did you do?
How did I do on Wheel of Time? I think I did as close to as good a job that I could have done. There's a few things I'd change if I could. I think I dropped the ball a little on Pat and Fane in retrospect. My Matt, particularly in Gathering Storm, was I got there on Matt, I feel, as best as I could do Matt, who is not as good as Robert Jordan could by the time I got to A Memory of Light, but it sticks out a little bit. But he just had a big event in his life. No spoilers, just big event. So just pretend he's off kilter because of the big event. Those are my two biggest regrets on that. I think I got pretty close to as good as I could have done. I don't think that I did the job Robert Jordan could have done. By definition, his would be better.
I need to say, from my perspective, I think most of the readers that I read, you've done a one hell of a job. I think that Jim would be proud, as I was excited to translate it. It was great in it. And I need to say that when I finished the book, I cried. I need to say. So if at this moment I need to say that, what's funny? It's a good book. What's that funny? Tell me later. So as we can say, oh my God, I didn't see it. So this is what happens when you're elected at the Oscars. I will leave you comment said. Okay, so. Yeah, I know. So I will just finish with this sentence. There are no endings and never will be endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it is an ending. Brenda Sandrson, thank you for having me.
Hi, welcome to the second part, where you get to ask questions. If you look over there, you will see a microphone. I am pointing at the microphone. We will have 4 people at a time at the microphone because we want everyone to hear the questions. So please, make your way towards the microphone. Wait.
No,
listen
stop.
to Adra.
Oh. They have a different way of doing this.
Hi, how are you? We have 2 people, one over there, that's Gilad, and one over here, that's Ol. When they call upon you, you will get up and go to the microphone, not before, and you can raise your hands and then we'll tell you, and you can listen to Brendan while you do it.
All right.
Okay, so we're gonna want, again, 4 people. While this gets selected, I do want to make a couple of comments. One is, I think one of the reasons you write so fast is that you don't have a beard. I mean, look at the evidence. And the other is that Michael Jordan is almost a professional basketball owner as well. Okay, so before you ask, I just want to make my general comment that I always make, which is a question is a short sentence that ends with a question mark. If you go on, I will cut you off. It's not because I mean to you, it's because I'm trying to be kind to the other people. Thank you. Go.
You are kind of mean, though, Didi. You got it.
Well, yeah. But, you know.
Yeah, that's your job.
It is my job.
Thank you. My question is about, especially in the Stormlight series, I've noticed that you use a lot of different languages, and when people that speak in the languages is not their mother tongues, they use different phrases and different, and they make mistakes that really reminds me of the mistakes that we Israelis do when we speak English. Do you speak multiple languages, and can you tell us a bit about the languages in the Cosmere?
Yeah. So I do speak poorly. I studied French all through high school, and my French is really bad. Then I was a missionary in Korea and learned Korean, and my Korean is slightly less bad. 한국말 조금 합니다. 치코리만큼. I said I don't speak Korean very well. I speak about as much as a rat's tail, which is a phrase in Korean. Learning another language was really helpful for writing fantasy books. Going and living in another culture, really helpful for writing fantasy books. Languages in the Cosmere are going to vary based on my needs for a given book. I spend my world building time on what is relevant to the characters and story. So for instance, the linguistics in Elantris were really important to the story. The linguistics in Mistborn were not as important to the story. And so I spent more time on the languages for Cell than I did for Scadrial. I did spend a decent amount of time on the languages for Bashar because all the different cultures and things like that, having conflict with one another, is a big part of the story. So world build in service of the story is my suggestion to you guys. Spend your time on things that are going to be relevant to the characters.
I just want to make another comment, which is, if you're more comfortable asking your question in Hebrew, that is fine. You can ask in Hebrew and I will translate it.
I have two quick questions. The first is very short, really. Is Hod named after the sphere of Hod, like with an Ashkenazi pronunciation?
Like in
The Kabbalistic thing.
The Kabbalistic thing. Not consciously, though the double I is based a little bit on the Kabbalah tree of life consciously. That's the illustration in the front cover of the first Stormlight book. And I have read a bunch of Kabbalah, so it's totally possible it added up in there on accident.
The second question is... I'm so sorry. The second question... Yes. The second question is that, have you had any negative feedback from other wheelchair users about Rizen's storyline?
I did go to a bunch of them to ask, so I've been trying, but if you have negative feedback to give me, I would love to hear it, because I had 2 beta readers in wheelchairs give me the best advice they could. But I obviously do not have that same disability, so there's things I'm going to get wrong.
Okay.
Okay. In the world of Stormlight, we have the weeping season, where there are no large storms. We don't have any new Stormlight. How did the Night Radiant did in the past? Like, how did they handle this time?
There's a couple of things. Some are spoilery for the books. Large gemstones can keep the Stormlight, though. Some dealt without and just didn't have it. In some cases, they had the large gemstone reservoirs. It was a thing they planned for, and there were a couple of other little hacks that are not obvious at the beginning of the series. So you actually get a Rapho on that. Yeah, Rapho!
Hi. My question is connected to an acquaintance of both of us, named lovely Australian named Shad, which is an expert in weapons and medieval warfare. It is very easy to criticize books and everything about
Not a treatise, a question.
because we have the real things in the world. But in all of your books, you have created magic systems that are so real. How is the initial thought when you create a new world? What is the initial process of creating a new magic system?
That's, yeah. So first I'll point you toward my essays called Sanderson's Laws, which are basically stepping through the rules I followed to make a magic system. There's 3 of those. I would recommend going and reading those. The process is really me trying to create something that is both different and unique, and something that approaches the theme of the story the right way. Like, I want a magic system that accents my story, not one that contradicts my story. And these things all come together into it. I'm looking for interesting flaws, interesting costs, interesting powers, and interesting connections to the rest of my world.
I just want to say, please hold the mic close to your mouth when you speak so everyone can hear the question clearly. Thank you.
Hey Brandon, just want to thank you for coming. Want to ask, was Nightblood a metal mind or a hemologic spike originally?
No, great question.
Please accept thank you for coming as read. We all thank him and we'll thank him at the end. But I just want everyone to have a chance to ask their question. Go ahead.
If we're talking about Nightblood, how do you go about creating characters that are inanimate objects but that come to life? because it seems a lot different. Also, gods, like things that are otherworldly, because characters like real people, like it's easy to write that.
Yeah.
But, like, considering gods and inanimate objects, like that's beyond sort of.
Well, fortunately for us writers, nobody among our audience will be able to contradict us. Right? And so, in some ways, writing something that nobody has ever experienced is a lot easier than writing something that a fair percentage of the population has experienced, but you have not. And so I just do my best. Being a writer is about learning to fake it, quote unquote, to pretend you're someone you're not, to pretend to have the experience that you don't so that character sounds authentic. And faking it on something no one can call you on is actually fairly easy.
Hi. Well, my biggest dream is to get read and find out, so I'd like to ask two questions, please. One of them is, you act a lot about religions in your books, and I was more interested in different aspects. Actually, the main conflict in Stormlight Archive really reminded me actually of like real-life politics we have here in Israel, and I was interested if maybe there was like real-world inspiration to this conflict between the main characters and the Voidbringers?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So yes, the simple answer is yes. Now my own personal experience with that is something similar but different, which is the conflict between the American Indians and the European settlers, which is an equally problematic and difficult part and thing to parse. Though what I really find interesting about your personal conflict is I don't think there are any easy answers. There's some in ours, like we should not have been such jerks to the Indians, right? And it basically, almost everything else you have about the conversation is far beneath that, right? And in this one, there aren't easy answers, right? It belonged to one group, then another group, then the other group, then the other group, and now everybody has a claim on the land. And when you encounter things that are that sticky and that interesting and that difficult, it makes for good storytelling. But I think it is a broader sort of human experience that you guys live the example for all of us about how difficult this all is. But it's the story of basically imperialism everywhere, right? And even if that imperialism was one people conquering another people in 70 AD, right? And the fact that that is just such a big mess is actually, I don't want to sound insensitive, but it's really nice for authors to be able to study these things and use it and tell stories about it, because particularly the types of stories I like to tell, which are stories that don't necessarily have easy answers, where you've got people you like on all sides of a different disagreement. And so yes, it was absolutely 100% inspired by what's going on here, and also to a lesser degree to what happened in America as well.
And it was such a problematic question that the mic stopped working.
We killed the mic. Yeah, I'll repeat your question, so just yell it.
No problem. I hope everyone can hear me. Well, I have a question about emotional elemency and the way it can affect things that aren't from Scadrill. Specifically, I had a conversation about what would it do to lifeless?
Emotional elemency would have a more compelling effect on lifeless than on a regular person. What's that? Breaking lifeless? Oh, to break lifeless? This, I'll raffo that for now, just because the actual details there, I'm in a raffo. So, well, you're really asking, can emotional elemency bring back the person that behind the lifeless, and that I have to raffo, I think. Oh, breaking a command of a lifeless. Oh, I'll still raffle that, but that's not, yeah. That's not nearly as difficult a question, but yeah. Yeah. I would say that if you're doing that in a role-playing game, I would call that a viable use of the magic as currently understood, so you could make that happen and have my authority to do it.
Okay. This will be quite esoteric, but let's go with it. When I read Wax and Wayne, I have in my head that's how Batman would look like if Brandon wrote it. And when I read the arithmetics, I think that's how Harry Potter would look like if you wrote it. My question is, do you have this in mind when you write such stories, and is it intentional?
It wasn't intentional for Wax and Wayne, but my pitch for Arithmetist to my publisher was the Muggle at Hogwarts. The Arithmetist is the person with no magic who's a super fan of the magic who gets to go to the magic school. So for the Arithmetist, it was actually part of my initial pitch and concept. So yeah.
Hello, thank you for coming here. My question is about Stormlight. We've heard a lot about the light eyes ranking system, but less so about the dark eyes. I would like to ask if you can tell us more about what happens at like 10th Nun, the lowest of the lowest.
Well, 10th Nun's easy because that's the slaves, right? So it's the middle ones that get really interesting. And actually, in some ways, the top ones are interesting because the Nuns, the top of the Alethi Dark Eyes, would be analogous to how in the early early 1800s, you saw a rise of a merchant class. It actually started back in the maybe 1600s, but the rise of a merchant class who were not noble, but were more powerful or richer than the nobility in almost every situation except for some legal situations. And that's what you're seeing there. That's really interesting. The middle Nuns are also interesting because they have the right of movement, which is an Alethi right that you can leave a city and move to another city. You basically can't be a sharecropper. You can't be required. You can't be a serf. And that power can be wielded over the Light Eyes, but if the Light Eyes is terrible, they can call upon the right to move, leave to a different city, and that Light Eyes is demoted, right? Because your Light Eyes rank can be influenced by how important the people, your rank, like your civic rank, you could actually become a lower Don because of that, or at least lose a lot of prestige because of that. And then the lowest of them are basically serfs. They don't have the right of movement. And the right of movement is a big dividing line. There is a Nun that doesn't have the right of movement that isn't a slave also. And these people have pretty dismal lives.
So we know that on Cell, it's incredibly difficult to world hop there because of a certain few dangerous factors in the cognitive realm.
Yep.
Is it possible to world hop by means that are not through the cognitive realm?
You wouldn't call it world hopping, but if you could FTL there, you could get there without having to go through the problems. So I call world hopping mostly using non-physical beings, but we haven't gotten there in the Cosmere really yet, except for like Six of the Dusk and things. And so the fan terminology may include world hopping as jumping in your ship and FTLing over. But nothing would prevent that. If you had a ship that could FTL using one of the magic systems in the physical realm, you would probably be okay getting to Cell.
I just wanted to know, it's a question about writing. I just wanted to know, what do you think about writer's notebook, and do you have one?
Yeah, mine's, I have two. I have a little, one of those little, whatever you call it, one of the little leather-bound ones that I put in my pocket. That's if I'm working on a specific book. If I'm not in the outlining stage on a specific book, which I'm not right now because I'm writing prose on something, at that point it's just my phone and I email cool ideas I have to myself to put in my file. It used to be called Cool Things That Need to Be Used sometime, but it was just too weird a title. Now it's just called Working Ideas.
Hey, so which character has the most similar voice to your
to your voice or represent you the most?
Alcatraz. Yeah. If you really want to know me, my mom says, she's read all the books, she says Alcatraz is the most like me. What did Emily said someone different? Wayne, I know, oh, she said Hoyd, but I don't deserve that. I'm really not Hoyd. I am a little Alcatraz, but you'll find a piece of me in everyone. Sometimes I say Jasna is closest to me, and I do get I am a very Jasna-like person at times, but it just depends on the mood you catch me in.
Hi. So the shades on Threnody, they're enforcing the 3 rules. Would something bad happen if they weren't enforcing those rules?
I'm gonna raffo that. The book on Threnody will not take place in hell. It'll take place on the continent where the evil is. But I hope to get into some of the rules for hell when we're there.
Hi, I want to ask, how were the realms created, and does their creation have anything to do with Adonelsium's shattering?
So good question, but the realms predate the shattering of Adonelsium and are part of the fundamental physics of the Cosmere. And so they would have been created at the equivalent of the Cosmere Big Bang when time was created and things like that.
Hey, Brandon. What would you say, or like 1 or 2 aspects in the fantasy genre that are not well appreciated by the mass?
Oh yeah. I've already mentioned it, but I think that truly great humorous fantasy is not appreciated for the difficulty that writing good humorous fantasy that also has good plot and world building. I'm speaking of Surteria again, right? Writing really good comedic fantasy is as hard as writing regular fantasy, plus more difficult for that extra layer. So I don't think that's appreciated. But in a general term, anything we do that's not about our prose is generally not appreciated, right? Because we have a tradition that has grown up, and it's actually fairly recent, because novels are fairly recent in the last 100 years or so, that that elevates one type of storytelling above all others. That type of storytelling is still pretty cool, right? Like, I can read something that's got a Nobel Prize and be like, wow, this is pretty awesome. I love what they're doing with this. But it's basically like awards only ever being given to one flavor of ice cream, right? It's like you have the best ice cream of the year award, but Rocky Road and its various incarnations always win, and a fruit, a sorbet never wins. And that's kind of how it feels that a lot of the book awards go, where it's only one type of art is seen as valid. Whereas when I look at something that's really intricately plotted, that I'm amazed by, and no one cares in the awards committee, that kind of bothers me, because I'm like, don't you see that there's lots of different types of art that create great stories? And I would love to see more awards given to someone who is able to create a really cool world and integrate it really well, because I think that's as hard as writing pretty prose. Granted, you get some people who can do it all, and they make me angry, Pat Rothfuss. But yeah.
Hey. I read the Mistborn series in audiobook form, and it was just such high quality, and I was wondering if that was specifically your decision, and if so, what made you choose to make it so good?
So if you're speaking of the Michael Kramer version, that came about because I loved him and Kate's readings of the Wheel of Time audiobooks. And they were my favorite audiobook readers. When they came and said, who do you want for your audiobooks? I said, can you please get Michael and Kate? If you're thinking of the full cast audios, the full cast audios are done by a group called Graphic Audio, and they just do high-class work. That's why we picked them. I listened to a bunch of the things they've done, and I have nothing to do with how great they are. That's all on them.
You probably get asked this a lot, but I don't really know the answer. So your magic systems are very structured, and there are specific rules that dominate them. But are there any universal laws that apply to all of the magic systems in the Cosmere together?
Yeah,
And if so, what are they?
Yeah, there's several of them. So basically, the most important one and relevant to people who enjoy real physics is that I consider something called investiture to be a third state of matter and energy. So instead of E equals mc squared, we have a third thing, investiture, in there. And you can change investiture to matter or to energy. And so because of that, that law that you can do this is where we see a lot of the Cosmere magics living. We also have a kind of rule that beings all exist, everything exists on 3 different levels. The physical, the spiritual, and the cognitive, right? And like we have DNA for our physical self, we also have mental DNA and spiritual DNA. And these things influence our, all 3 influence one another. And so, for instance, you couldn't test an allomancer's blood and find the allomancy gene because it is in a different set of their DNA. You just have 3 sets. You could compose a test that could test it on the spiritual realm, but you're going to have to use, you know, a different branch of physics to do that and determine who was an allomancer. And so they all work on these kind of fundamental rules of your identity, your connection, and your being part of your soul, and the magic's working through those things. And so there's some fundamental rules about this, about changing forms from energy to matter, and you having this identity, investiture, and connection stored in your spiritual DNA that are really relevant to everything.
Hi. In the Reckoners, you mostly focused on the USA and such, but I assuming that it happened across the world. So my question is, what happened to Israel?
Oh man, I'm barely figuring out what happened in Europe. Yeah, you're gonna make me stretch. I will raffle that for now. Just it'll be a bug in my ear until I figure it out. How about that?
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
My question is, did the Elantrians came to Roshar in the first place? Because that question came up after I reread Elantris, so...
Are you talking about specifically the old ones why were they on Roshar? So those specific individuals, the Irie, as we call them, are a group of Elantrians that are not, you know, representing all Elantrians. They were there. The one that you've met is there for a specific reason. The Irie are involved there. They're mostly where you've seen them is on Scadrial so far. But they are interested in Roshar. Are you talking about the lighthouse housekeeper, I assume? So the lighthouse keeper is not, would be counted, I guess, as one of the Irie. And is there for a specific purpose, but it is not related to their general purpose that they are trying to achieve. How's that for being vague? I'm sorry.
Earlier you've touched on successfully balancing a full-time job, studying, and writing. I would like to ask for your advice on that.
See, I give bad advice on this, balancing writing, work, and things like that, because I cheated, right? I cheated by getting a job that let me write while I was at work, so I did 2 things at once. My friends who have had to have a real job and writing at the same time is much, much more difficult. This is particularly true if you have a job that drains you emotionally and mentally of the same resources you use to write. For instance, it doesn't mean the job is bad, but for instance, computer programming uses the same mental resources that writing a book does, so it can be really hard to come home from that and to write. On the other hand, being a mechanic usually doesn't, right? People who are mechanics can turn on music, think about the book they're going to write, and when they come home at night, write for a few hours and are generally not going to feel mentally exhausted. The answers I've asked my friends who did this, what to do if you do have a job like this, is they say, right before you go to work, or right during your lunch hour, or the third option is to find a habit or cue that can get you into the writing mood. A lot of them use going to the gym, so that you get a break from coming home, you kind of deactivate your brain for a little while, then later in the evening you go to the gym, you turn on the same music, you think about your story, and then you come home and you write like a really powerful power session of a half hour and try to get 500 words in that half hour and then be doing it that way. But go talk to some people who did it for real rather than somebody who cheated like me.
So I wanted to ask about your process or about your research when creating specific cultural aspects that have a much wider influence than just the aspect happening. For example, in Stormlight, only women learning to read and only them doing research.
Right. So how do I research things like this? I've become a student of human society and nature. Like, a lot of these things are coming from me reading about different cultures, experiencing different cultures, and asking myself, I'm looking for things that feel like things human beings would do, but that are fantastical, which allows us to separate some of the baggage from our world. For instance, Rosharan culture is very sexist, right? And using the sexism of our world, number one, can be very triggering to some readers and make it hard to read the book, but it also brings a lot of baggage. And doing it in a fantastical way that you say, yeah, that's totally sexist, but it's really interesting and different, allows the reader to kind of let me explore. Another example, this is the light eyes, dark eyes thing, right? Putting the racism based on eye color allows me to take away some of the baggage of our world racism and also deal with the issue in the same way. And make it so that it's still enjoyable to read, still feels human, but also feels fantasy. And what I'm always looking for is for something that can do that. I love how fantasy can, in some ways, drill to the core of an idea in a way that a contemporary book wouldn't be able to, because of the baggage they have to deal with first. And a lot of that stuff is about the baggage, and it's important. And I shouldn't even call it baggage, because it's like, these issues are really relevant and important, but it allows fantasy to approach things from a direction that no contemporary book could, and that's what I'm looking for. Safe Hand came from, in its origin, is the fact that in a lot of cultures you don't show the bottom of your feet to people, right? In American culture, that's not a thing. When I heard like in Korea, you sit like this and you're basically flipping off that whole group, sorry, I was like, what? That's just not that's so interesting. And it got me thinking about social mores that are very different from my own. And that eventually led me to the Safe Hand for various other reasons as well.
So yesterday in the metal panel, you talked about how creating aluminum revolutionized our society. So ever since yesterday, I wondered if we one day can see some kind of the Empire from Star Wars, like a society like that, probably from Scradrell, that is made entirely of aluminium and things of that nature.
Yeah, I totally can. Absolutely, I can see that, and it's going to be pretty cool if I can get it all to work.
Just a sec for the next question as well. Are we capping now?
Is this our last questions?
Not last question, but everybody, I'm sorry, you can put your hands down. The last few people picked are the last few people picked. Sorry.
Who do you know which idea is good and on what to give up?
What a great question. This takes practice, and my answer to you is most questions or most ideas are good enough. An experienced writer can take almost any idea and make a great story out of it. Jim Butcher has a wonderful story about this, where he was arguing this point before he got published with someone online, and he said to them, ideas are not what's important. The skill to manipulate ideas and turn them into something cool is what's important. And I believe this 100%. And the person online said, no, 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 some ideas are great, some are terrible, and that's just how it is. And so Jim said, give me your 2 worst ideas, and I'm going to write a story. And they said, cross the Lost Roman Legion with Pokemon, which I think those are both great ideas. So I don't know what they're thinking, but that's where the Codex Alera books came from, which are a best-selling series. Yeah. So in answer to you is, most ideas are viable. But as a writer, you do have to choose between hundreds of cool ideas and decide which ones you really want to write a story about. And for me, what really gives me the test is if I take an idea and I combine it with several other ideas I have, do they together make something really different and cool? Like I had the idea for the Final Empire. The hero had failed and the Dark Lord had taken over, separately from the idea of wanting to do a story about a heist. And I tried to write the Final Empire book without, just by itself, and it was a failure. But when I added the heist element together, and I'm like, ooh, they're going to rob the Dark Lord who's ruled for 1,000 years because the hero failed, those 2 ideas together became way cooler to me, right? And so when your ideas are building on each other to make a story even that much more exciting, then that's how I know to stick with those ideas.
Also, a heist is always good.
Yeah, heists are always great.
In Arcanum Unbounded, you mentioned that Cell is one of the biggest planets. You also mentioned that there are 3 empires on that planet. In Atlantis 2, you also mentioned that they are largely ignorant of each other. Will we get a book in which those empires interact? Maybe
Yes.
Atlantis 2? Also, can you please specify on the nature and maybe some inspirations you got in writing and thinking about them?
So sure. Cell wears its inspirations quite blatantly on its sleeve, right? It's not that obvious, for instance, in Stormlight that the Alethi are based off of the Mongolians, because there's so much more in the mix there that it's not quite as obvious. But in Cell, it's a little more obvious. You know, basically the idea came to me that what if the Vikings had united behind a very hierarchical religion like Catholicism, and we had Catholic Vikings conquering the world. What would the world look like? And that is where the entire religion came from. Actually, the truth is, it's like there was this priest, right? And one group became Buddhists, and the others became Catholics, and the Catholic Vikings Buddhist Renaissance Italians is kind of where we got there. And of course, the Rose Empire, the inspirations are a little bit more Eastern and Middle Easterns. For instance, the Grands are based on Babylonian influences, and I'm kind of looking at a lot of Babylonian, a little bit of Syrian, but of course, Shay is very, very clearly based on East Asian cultures, and specifically China. So the empires and things like that, for there, you might have noticed that we've got a Europe-centered one and an Asia/Asia-centered one, so you might be able to theorize where the third empire's inspirations might be, or at least a list of possible candidates.
Nope.
Does Gavilar and Amram knew that Nel and Kalak are the heralds and that all the other heralds also...
That's a spoiler. Can you talk around it?
Yeah, so did they knew that the people they met, who were they? And also, if they know why they still continue on their missions.
Let's just say that information is not being shared clearly and succinctly between different groups that are interacting in the prologues of the Stormlight books. How about that? But the cat obviously got out of that particular bag that you're asking about, and the ramifications of it are in the first prologue. So, yeah. You'll find out. When this book comes out, your question will get answered pretty clearly. So just know that you'll get your answer in about a year.
Are there any cool powers or mechanics that you really liked but had to cut out of your work?
Oh, cool powers or mechanics that I really like or had to cut out of my work. I went through a lot of cool powers for Elemency that I thought were nifty that I didn't end up using. So yes, there's some there. You would ask me to list a few, and I would just have to get out the notes to remind myself because it's been, 15 years. So I'm not sure what they are, but I know I went through a whole list of abilities before I settled on the ones that I was going to use. I cut a really fun character from Elantris. You can read the deleted scenes on my website. There was a really fun antagonist who showed up in the story at the wrong place. It was a big distraction. I cut that out. Every book has some things that get trimmed or cut out. Usually they are not really big elements. Book 3 of Stormlight was supposed to have a Syl viewpoint. And it didn't get in there, but we'll get it in another book, don't worry. It just didn't fit. We had even a little symbol drawn up for her, so hopefully we'll be able to use it in the next book. So there's just things that happen that just don't end up working, and they end up on the cutting room floor, and you'd like, why, don't cut any of it, Brandon, just leave it. Trust me, it's better. It's better. The first draft of Oathbringer was 540,000 words long, and the final cut was 460,000 words. So we cut like 80,000 words, which is an entire novel, out of that book. But the book is way stronger for having done that, and you wouldn't enjoy it as much. It's like, I try to get it down so that the soda tastes right. And if it's watered down too much, you're like, great, I get 2 cups of Coke instead of 1, but both of them taste half as good. I would rather give you 1 really good cup of Coke, or I don't really like Coke, so. Root beer, you guys don't like root beer, yeah.
Some people like root beer here.
Yeah, okay. So, there you go.
I would like to thank all of you for coming and for your excellent questions. I would like to thank Czafril for hosting the first half. And of course, I would like to thank our guest of honor, Brandon Sanderson.